Okay, well, good morning, everyone, and I want to thank, I guess, the organizing team and whatnot for selecting our paper as a keynote. And my name is Ed Jaselskas. I'm a professor at North Carolina State University. As Jonas said, the project that I'll be presenting to you happened over about a 1.5 year period of time. We were working with the North Carolina DOT. All the people you see up on the screen here were part of the project in one way, so we've had a rather large team to do this. Abdullah, my PhD student, is here, and he helped work on the project as well. He's going to help with the camera. So what this project is all about, we were hired by the North Carolina Department of Transportation to look at helping them predict their what they call payout curves. Okay, so if you're on an owner's side, okay, owners have to predict well in advance how much money they're going to need for their future construction projects. Okay, and it may be 3, 4, 5 years out, even before the construction project begins. They have to figure out what their cash flows are going to be, so they can go to the state legislature and appropriate the necessary funds for the projects. So it's really important that if you're an owner to try to nail down exactly what your cash flow needs are going to be, way out into the future. And the problem that the NCDOT had was that they didn't really have a good way to predict what their cash flow needs are. That once construction starts, their cash flows just change all around. The actuals and planned are not what they anticipated. So they brought us in to see what kind of insights we could provide to them to help them improve, cash flow expenditure predictions, essentially. So they're saying that the advancing department is work here, so I have to go here. So here's the outline for the presentation. Start with kind of the research overview, and then provide some insights in terms of predicting the construction cash flow expenditures, overall modeling approach, and factors that relate to essentially achieving the let date or the bidding date for the project, and then from there moving on into signing the contract with the contractor, and then going into the construction phase. And we came up with 3 modeling concepts for the DOT to help them better predict their cash flows. So I kind of already mentioned some of this, but the essential question that the DOT gave us to start with was here: how can the NCDOT improve its ability to predict payout expenditures on individual mega projects and thus improve its cash flow management predictability? They weren't so interested in smaller projects, and they have a lot of small projects. They were interested in predicting cash flows on their mega projects, and I'll define what mega means, because it means different things for different people later on. So you can see the objectives there. We're really looking at insights and factors that can help them better improve their cash flow predictability, and then come up with some models for them. And what we did really was just kind of come up with a design for the models as opposed to actual models that they could implement. So I'll just show you kind of the concepts that we came up with. So let me start with this question here. This is kind of an audience question, kind of get your participation in here. So if you look at all the construction projects that are going on in the world, what percentage of those projects you think will actually, achieve their targeted, budget and their schedule, initial budget and initial schedule? So let's say 100 projects. 100 projects. How many of those 100 projects would actually meet their authorized cost and schedule when the project finishes? Anybody have a guess? So you've got 100 projects. How many are going to meet their authorized cost and schedule? 30? A third. Okay, so about 33 or so. 10. Other guess? 10. Okay, 10 out of 100. 10 to 20. Do I hear somebody in the back? 15. 80? 80 will meet it. Wow. Well, okay, so the Construction Industry Institute did some research on this question right here. And they only found that basically 1 in 20 or 5 out of 100 projects will actually meet their authorized cost and schedule.
which is kind of surprising. I mean, I guess it is and it isn't, but these were some of the challenges that we faced going into this project. Trying to predict cash flows, trying to predict when a project is actually going to finish and how much it's actually going to cost. It sounds like it should be easy to do. We've got all kinds of nice technologies and whatnot, but it's not easy, okay? So that was a little bit surprising. For the NCDOT, let me just define what a mega project is. So, you know, you talk to the Department of Energy. I do work with the DOE in the United States, and you know, their notion of a mega project is probably several $100 million. That's a mega project. It's a large project. For the NCDOT, it's smaller. It's $50 million is a large project for them. 50 million or over is considered a mega project. For the DOE or for Bechtel Corporation, you know, that's probably a very small project. The mega projects account for 50% of the total construction expenditures for them and less than 10% of the total project count. So there's not as many of these mega projects, but they account for most of the cash flow, for this organization. If you look at recent past performance on design and build projects for the NCDOT, only about 6% came in over budget and 14% experienced schedule delays. So, you know, but you'll see in the projects we studied, most of them did not meet their authorized costs and schedules. So they were off, you know, not too much in some cases, but they were off from their original targets. This curve right here shows you typical expenditures. Okay, we got monthly payouts. The blue line represents the actual expenditures for one particular mega project, and the green line represents the estimated, what the NCDOT estimated in terms of what the cash flows are going to be on that project. And you can see here, I kind of put some red circles around a couple areas. This one in particular, their estimate was a lot higher than what they actually spent for a few of those months, and then just the opposite happened over here. In other places, they're off. It's not really. They're not able to predict the actual cash flows very well. And what they want to do, it says, can you kind of marry those two curves? So our estimate matches what the actuals are. That's what we want. Why is that important for an owner? It's important for an owner because if they're not spending as much money as they said they were going to spend, the legislature, the state legislature is going to see a pile of money sitting in a bank account that's not spent. Okay, sorry. Can you guys hear me in the back? You can't hear me. Can you hear me now? Okay, apologize. So what I was saying was it's important for this organization to try to be able to better predict cash flows, because when they're under predicting and they start accumulating too much cash flow in their bank account and they're not spending it when they say they're going to spend it, the state legislature doesn't like it, because they say, why are you coming to us for more money? You've got plenty of money in the bank. And then the NCDOT has to explain, well, we actually are going to spend that money in the future, but not right now. So that's led to some issues there. So what we did was this. Okay, this is kind of a pictorial process. Now we know that in the end, we want to, during the construction phase, we want to try to better predict the cash flows for a project, okay? But really the process of predicting cash flows out here starts where? It starts real early. It starts during the pre-construction phase. When the projects are kind of in the books, they have what's called a STIP, like a State Transportation Improvement Plan or Program. And that STIP book, you know, could have projects in there that are 5 years out from starting. But yet those projects have to have a cost and a schedule and predicted cash flows so that, you know, they know how much money they need to go to the state legislature for funding appropriation. So really, being able to predict cash flow on a project doesn't begin out here during the construction phase. It's really beginning very early during the pre-construction phase. So I thought this analogy here of a plane landing. So you got a plane coming in, and it's going to touch down on the runway on the let date. So the let date is the day that the project is going to let to a contractor, either a design bid builder, contractor, or a design builder. Okay, it's going to finish the design of the project and then do the construction. So the plane comes in, and we're looking at, you got to hit that let date. And what we found in our research was that this is a key milestone right here. The project hits that let date, then there's a better chance that the DOT is going to be able to predict the construction expenditures on the project. If the project doesn't hit the let date, then all bets are off. The whole curve basically is going to shift. So month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, or whatever, maybe a year or more. So that's a key let date. And once you establish the let date, you're going to make that, then there's a certain duration between the let date and start of construction, which is essentially the contract approval, okay? And then the contractor can start construction. And I'll mention later on that there's a difference between a design builder doing the project versus just the contractor who's going to take the plans and start constructing. Okay, so we'll start then with providing some insights for the pre-construction phase. So before we do that, some of the terminology that you're going to see later on relates to this, and I'll just quickly go through this. But every organization, it seems like uses some kind of a stage gate approach. Okay, so CII uses a stage gate approach. Construction Industry Institute, the Department of Energy uses what's called a critical decision approach. CD, they have critical decisions, 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4 for their projects. Well, the NCDOT has their own stage gate process. They call them concurrence points. So you're going to see some of this terminology later on in the presentation. Concurrence point 1 is essentially looking at establishing the purpose and need for the project. Okay, so do we need to build a bridge here? Do we need to build a road? Yes or no? Okay, that's concurrence point 1. If you agree, yes, we've got to do this project. So you pass concurrence point 1, you go to concurrence point 2, which is essentially establishing all the alternatives that would accomplish, the goal. Okay, so we've got to somehow, get from, maybe the main island to another island. How do we do it? We can build a bridge, we can build a tunnel, we can put a ferry system in. There's lots of alternatives. So concurrence point 2 for the NCDOT is establishing the alternatives. Concurrence point 3 would be selecting what they call LEDPA, which is the least environmentally damaging preferred alternative. So of all these alternatives, which ones would be the best alternative? Okay, so they select the alternative at concurrence point 3, and then at concurrence point 4, there's different levels of 4 here, which kind of take you through probably from conceptual design through preliminary design into detailed design. So once you get through all the concurrence 4s, you're ready to start construction. Okay. So what we found here, first of all, is this plane is coming in to make a landing for your let date. We asked subject matter experts the question, when a project is 36 months out from the let date, what's the chance that that project is going to actually meet the let date? And so we talked to a lot of different people, and what they told us essentially was that about 24 to 60% of the projects that are 36 months out, okay, coming into the runway essentially will actually meet the let date. When the project gets within the 12 months from the let date, there's a 60 to 95% chance that the project is actually going to make the let date. So it's much better, but there's still things that could happen even a year before the let date that could derail the project. Okay. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you some of the factors, factors that can impact the planning and design stage that can derail a project and not allow it to make its let date. So in talking to, I think it was like 23 subject matter experts, they were both owners and contractors, we asked them questions about what factors can impact projects during the pre-construction phase, to not allow them to meet their let date. And I hope you can see this in the back. This may be kind of small for you guys, so let me just go through. So planning, When we talk about planning, we talk about the concurrence points. The planning phase is probably concurrence point 1, the need for the project. Concurrence point 2 would be identifying various alternatives. That's still in the planning phase. Certainly there's some conceptual design that occurs in there, but it's probably, concurrence point 1, 2, and maybe up to 3 would be planning. And so this is what the experts told us. These are reasons for basically planning factor, reasons that affect the let date. Documents are incomplete. You have a scope change, so somebody decides, well, we need a wider bridge. The bridge that you put in concurrence point, 2 is not wide enough. We've got double the width for future planning. Document changes, merger and agency coordination. The DOT, all projects have to get permits before you can start construction. And in the United States, there's a lot of different agencies. There's water and air quality, EPA. A lot of agencies have to basically approve the project before a permit is going to be approved. And so the DOT has what's called a merger process, where all the heads of these agencies come together to look at the project and put their 2 cents in, essentially. And so sometimes there's a lot of recycling that happens on the design. But this merger agency coordination can cause slowdowns in terms of getting permits and missing let dates. Also, public involvement, it's a double-edged sword. The public are key stakeholders in the project. Okay, you've got to involve them, but on the other hand, they can also slow your project down too, because they may want to see something different. They say, we don't want, this bridge here doesn't look appropriate. We'd rather do something else. We want to have a tunnel. We don't want to have a bridge. So public involvement can also create problems with meeting the let date. And then railroad coordination is another. So these are kind of the key factors that occur during the planning stages of the project that can derail your let date. So moving on into the design stage. So now you've selected the alternative and you're putting your design together and then going for permits. So what are the key design factors that can affect let date? Well, what we found here, the top ones anyway, I'll mention these. This says late input going into the design phase. There's design revisions that occur, and then again, this merger agency coordination. Okay, those are the 3 top factors for reasons for let date delay during the design phase. Let's look at external letting delay factors. Okay, so on the outside, you've got to work with different municipalities, cities, or townships also have a stake in the permitting process, and so they can have an impact on whether you're going to make your let date or not. And also utilities are a big reason for let date delay. So in other words, if the DOT, let's say, wants to build a road and it's going to have to interfere with some utilities, and the utilities actually own the right of way, that's a real problem. So basically the DOT has to work with the utilities and coordinate with them to get the utilities moved in a timely fashion, and that can kind of be sticky. So these are the key external factors that can affect let date. Okay, so this slide right here is really interesting. We put together essentially some what we call strategic milestones for meeting the let date. So we looked at a number of DOT projects and looked at when the project actually was let. Okay, when was it let? And then we're looking at some what I'll call like interim milestone dates. Okay, so the key milestone is we want to make the let date, right? So there's a lot of interim milestones that you need to meet before you're going to meet that key milestone, right? And so we identify these various activities here as interim milestone activities. So, for example, location and design approval on all the projects we looked at happened anywhere from 101 to 66 months before the let date. The right-of-way authorization occurred anywhere from 98 months to 25 months before the let date. Final plans to design, 11 to 5 months. So, and then permit, 35 to 1 month before the let date. So you can see where something like this could be helpful for a DOT. They may want to ask the question, is this project on track to meeting the let date? They can take this milestone chart, and this happens to be for design, bid, build, new location projects. And you can just check off. In fact, we created a checklist right here for them. So for design, bid, build, new location projects, we put these questions together based on that previous slide. For example, does the NCDOT have location and design approval at least 66 months before the let date? Yes or no? And the same with the other interim milestones, yes or no. So hopefully, if the DOT is meeting all of these interim milestones, then there's a really good chance that they're going to meet their main goal of hitting that let date. Okay, which is important. Why? Because then you can better predict the cash flows on the project. Okay? So we did the same thing for design, bid, build, widening projects, and here you can see concurrence point 3, and concurrence point 3 is selecting the alternative. Okay, so they're selecting the alternative anywhere from 109 months to 54 months before the let date. And then you can see the other key activities that they have to meet. And again, we put together a checklist, which you see right here. And some other recommendations for meeting the let date. We identified different issues, like for example, let date delay. Okay, you start seeing that coming. Maybe you didn't make a milestone. Okay, you missed one of the earlier milestones. What do? So you've got to come up with some kind of corrective action. And so what they told us was put someone in charge of coordinating all the pieces. Okay, so here are all the pieces, and we got to make these interim milestones. Let's put someone in charge to make sure we accomplish those at the schedule. Scope creep, another one that many people mentioned to us. Apply a pencils down concept when reaching the point for issuing permits. No change, scope change, no change in plans before the let date. Railroads have caused delays in the past, so early railroad coordination is essential. And then it's basically the same thing with utilities, utility coordination and relocation issues, which are very common on mega projects. So planning and coordinating with various stakeholders ahead of time to give utilities move before construction begins. So these are just some other almost common sense kind of things that you can do to improve your chances of meeting the let date. So what I've done so far is talk about the pre-construction phase, okay, and looked at different reasons and factors that cause let date delays, and then showed you the kind of the strategic milestones that you need to hit in order to make this date right here. Okay, so now we'll move into the bidding phase, and there's not as much here to talk about, but what we found is the duration, looking at the duration of time between the let date of the project and the contract approval, okay, varies depending on whether it's a design build project or a design bid build project. You can see the time difference. It's really not that much of a difference, by a week difference. But we know there's about 38 days or so that passes between the let date on the project and then the contract signing with the design builder, 43.6 days for design bid build. So if it's a design build project, what does that mean? That means that the design builder is going to have to finish the design because they basically come in with some concepts for the DOT. The DOT liked that particular contractor, design builder, selected them. Now that they're selected, they have a contract, they've got to finish the design. So they're going into detailed design essentially, right? And then they'll go into construction. If it's a design bid build project, the plans are already done. The permits are already in hand. The contractor can essentially just start spending money on construction. So what does that mean? That means the shapes of the payout curves are going to be different between a design builder and a design bid builder, okay? They're going to be different, and I'll show you that in just a minute. So these are some insights that we found in talking to subject matter experts for meeting the construction start dates. Some of the key risk areas relate to utilities, as we've talked about. Utilities are always on a critical path. About 75% of major projects in urban areas are going to experience some kind of utility problem, and relocation of utilities typically takes about 12 to 18 months. There's also unforeseen geotechnical conditions. There's also railroad issues if you're dealing with the railroad. The key is to get the plans approved, schedule flagman and track time in advance, and then, of course, if there's right-of-way issues, you've got to get that taken care of with the owners. If the owner doesn't want to give up the property or land to the DOT, there's always what's called eminent domain. So they're always going to get the land. And then permits, this is kind of interesting. When the DOT goes out to get the permit, it takes typically longer for them to get the permits. If a design builder goes out to get the permits, they can get it quicker. And the permitting agencies have a better, I guess they call it trust relationship with the contractors because they have more hands-on experience with the actual project itself. Okay, so that's some of the insights then related to the bidding phase of the project. And now we'll go into the construction phase and try to predict the payout curve for the project. Okay, with the literature review, there's a lot of literature of researchers, trying to do the same thing, trying to develop, accurate payout curves for projects using different modeling approaches, Monte Carlo simulation, for example, case-based reasoning, neural network models, different kinds of regression models, 6th-degree polynomial regression. So we kind of looked at all that. It's a lot of good research that's been done in this area, and we kind of followed along with some of the research and looked at some regression modeling techniques ourselves, looking at actual DOT project data, and trying to develop some kind of regression models. And that's what we spent a lot of time working on. So here's what we found. Research findings on cash flow prediction. What we found was the most significant variable for predicting monthly construction expenditures is when the letting takes place. I mentioned that. We find that there's different shapes of payout curves for design to build projects and design build projects. So, you've heard of the standard S-shaped curve, the S curve we all talk about when we teach project controls. They don't always look like S curves, and I'll show you. Okay. Also, that the accuracy of even the contractor's payout curve, is hit or miss. Okay, so the contractor can start with what they think they're going to spend on the project, and then things happen, right? The weather was worse than they thought. That changed the expenditure curve. There were change orders that came about, things like that. So even for the contractor, it can be challenging to meet their own expenditure curves for the project. And then the last one here, surge payments. Okay, so it occurs after, let's say, a bridge superstructure is delivered. So it's a big expense item that just hit, and now the contractor wants to be paid. So I mentioned that the shapes of the payout curves for design bid build projects and design build projects are different. Okay, so we looked at a number of actual projects. You see here on this side, a number of projects, and we plotted out the payout curves for these projects. And right in here, you can see that for design bid build projects, the contractors immediately started construction. So the expenditure curve is very steep. Okay, right off the get-go, and that's different compared to a design build project. The other thing we tried to do here was normalize all of the data. So all these projects here are different sizes and time durations, And so they were all normalized. So on the x-axis, you see percentage of time from 0% to actually 100% would be the authorized, in this case, time to complete the project. And on the y-axis, is cost, percentage of cost from 0%, here's 100% right here. So all the projects were actually targeted to hit this point right here. But you see what happened in reality, the projects missed that target. This one right here in particular was 140% of the authorized schedule. Okay, so it kind of, what's interesting, it kind of falls in line with the CII study that shows that very few projects actually meet their authorized cost and schedule. And it's happening here for the DOT mega projects as well. Okay. So if we look at design build, so just remember this right here, the shape of that, this curve right here for design build projects. Moving on to design build mega projects, you can see the difference in the shape, right? So it's a little flatter. Why is that? Why is the shape flatter? We're not starting construction. We can't. We've got a conceptual design, maybe into preliminary design, but we don't have the detailed design finished yet. So the contractor has to finish the design. That takes a little bit of time. 9 to 10 months is what they were saying to complete the design activities. They have to get the permit in that time frame and then can start construction. So that's why it starts out a little slower and then it picks up. Okay. And again, for the design build projects, we have more in this case. And most of them again did not hit their authorized cost and schedule. Okay. So if we look at one of the projects, okay, I'll just kind of show you how the payout curve changes for one project, and you'll see the reasons why. So here's a project. Right here was the original plan. That's the green line, right? That was the original plan. That was 7/7/2009, so I call it factor 1:1, or it's 100%, 100%. Well, a month later, there was a change which reduced some of the scope of the project. So let's take some money out of the project and keep the time the same. So some money came out of the project, and that changed the shape of the curve right there, even a month after contract signing. And then you go to 3, so February of 2011, a couple of years later, a supplemental or change order comes through in the order of $7.8 million. This is a $53 million job, so it's a pretty sizable change order. And the contractor was given 183 more days to complete the work. So now the shape of the payout curve changes again. Okay, from the original shape, now it's up here. And then on September 8th, 2013, so a couple years later, there was a claim that was filed, and the contractor was given additional time, okay, for the project. So now the project actually finished out here about 1.41 on the schedule, 1.14 on the cost, and the shape changed. So this is really the problem that we faced, okay, in trying to help the DOT come up with a better predictive model for the payout shape of the project. Really quite challenging, actually. So all we could really do, I think, and we had a limited amount of data to do this, so all we could really do is stay fairly high level and give them some guidance on ideas, modeling ideas, okay? And that's what I'm going to share with you, 3 kind of modeling ideas, 2 that can help them better predict the cash flow for the construction project when they're during the pre-construction phase. So they may be 3 to 5 years out. What can they do to help come up with a better prediction of the cash flow for the project? So we came up with two approaches there. One we call more of a macro approach, and kind of looking at past data, the S curves for past data, and the other approach out there is a bottoms-up approach, and trying to build up the cash flows on an activity by activity basis. Knowing the kind of project it is that we're going to build 4 years from now, we know what kind of activities are going to be in the project, Using parametric cost estimates, we can figure out the amount of money we're going to spend for each of the activities, and then figure out the timing of the activities. I'll go into this in more detail. I'm just kind of giving you the overview. But yeah, so let me start with the first one. Oh, before I do, just want to mention there's a lot of factors, project factors that can also influence the shape of the S-curve. Okay, things like, seasonality, whether it's the summer, or the winter. Well, in North Carolina, in the mountains, we can get winter. And that will slow the construction down. So when it slows construction down, that means it slows the payments down to the contractor. During the summer is really when the contractors, can really get out there and get work done. And so you'll see higher expenditures occurring, during the summer. So seasonality can make a difference in terms of cash flow prediction. And other things as well too, like location, whether the project's in a mountainous area, on the coast, or kind of in between the Piedmont area. Project type, whether it's a new location project like a grassroots project, or whether it's an existing roadway that you're trying to widen, that can also impact project cash flows as well. So there's a lot of considerations, a lot of factors that come into play when you're trying to come up with a better predictive cash flow model. So we'll start here. I kind of mentioned this during the pre-construction phase. There's two approaches that I'm going to talk about, top-down approach, bottom-up approach, and then during the construction phase, talk about how you can better predict cash flows over time. All right. So I'm going to kind of speed up here. So what we did, looking at the macro approach. Macro just means let's look at past project data. And we're going to model past project data for specific kinds of projects and say, here's the kind of curve that you can use to predict cash flows in the future for a similar kind of project. And so here's one project here that we did, and the modeling that we did, we tried all kinds of different modeling techniques using MATLAB. We found that a third order function actually gave us a pretty good prediction of the actual expenditures. This is the red line represents the actual expenditures for the project. This is a cumulative actual expenditures, so you can see this is a design bid build project because the expenditures are coming out quicker. Okay, and the model is the screen line right there. And let me just mention that right now the NCDOT uses a straight line. This blue line right here is what the NCDOT uses for their prediction of cash flow. So automatically they're off, okay, just by using a straight line. In fact, with their modeling approach, the straight line model will underpredict the actual expenditures early on and then overpredict the actual expenditures later, okay? So automatically we can, let me just jump to this right here. So automatically we could tell the DOT the straight line modeling approach is not very accurate, okay? Projects are going to follow some kind of a convex shaped curve. Now this is designed to build, so it kind of looks like a banana. We found some correlations between larger projects, which had kind of a flatter curve, versus smaller projects, which was more convex. So I think with more data, we'd have to validate this. We had very little data to do these kind of curves. But if we had more data, we could put some curves together for the DOT and say, instead of using a straight line curve for predicting cash flows, which we know is flawed, use something that's going to be more representative of what the actual costs are going to be. So it's going to be some kind of a convex curve for design to build projects. Okay, so as far as the bottom-up approach, I kind of explained this earlier. The bottom-up approach, this is during the pre-construction phase, okay? Using a bottom-up approach to come up with your cash flow curve. And it really just means that the DOT is going to have to look at past data for similar projects, identify activities like clearing and grubbing, for example. The kinds of activities that you typically see on similar type of project. Use parametric cost estimating techniques from your past data to figure out, project forward what the cost for each of the activities are going to be. Also look at past schedules on similar types of projects to figure out when the timing essentially of the activities, put them into a chart like this, and then develop your cash flow curve. This is a bottoms-up approach technique to developing your cash flow curve, even several years before the project begins. And finally, moving on to the construction phase. And now you're in the construction phase, and even there, things move around. Okay, so for mega projects, the contractors are required to provide the owner with their expected construction expenditure curve right at the beginning. Okay, so and then every quarter they're required to update their expenditure curve, give that to the owner. So what we're saying is the contractor really knows best. During construction, let's rely on the contractor expenditure curve and any updates that come in and feed that into your models for coming up with a good predictor of future cash flows. So that's kind of how we left it during the construction phase with the DOT. And so starting to summarize here, so we kind of put it all together. So the notion of trying to predict what the expenditure curve is going to look like on a project way out in the future. We start with the pre-construction phase and meeting the let date. That's critical. And we came up with these strategic milestones, depending on whether it was a design-build project or design-build project. You have different milestones. We call these interim milestones that you need to meet in order to have a good chance of meeting your let date. Okay, so we talked about that. We also studied the time duration between the bid letting period and the start of construction, or could be the signing of the contract if it's a design-build project. So we know how many days approximately it takes for that to happen. We know the kinds of things that can mess up, start of construction, like not getting a permit on time or dealing with utilities or railroads and things like that. And I think with pretty good certainty, we can check off and say, yeah, we can provide the right insights and tell you if your project's going to meet the let date. And then once it does, the bidding phase, we know how long that's going to take to get to the start of construction or contract approval. But then when you get into the construction phase, as we talked about, it's less certain. Okay, even with the best, estimating packages and scheduling packages, Primavera and Acumen Views and things like that, it's still hard to nail this because most mega projects are not going to hit their original target, as we talked about at the beginning of the presentation. 5 projects out of 100 actually meet their original cost and schedule targets for various reasons. It's no different for the DOT. They're seeing the same kind of issues happening. So whenever something changes, a cost change or schedule change happens, well, guess what? That changes the shape of the payout curve. So I put a big red question mark on this phase because even with all the work that we did, there's so many uncertainties that happen during the construction process that make coming up with an accurate, predictive model, cash flow model, really challenging. I mean that was really our conclusion at the end of our study. So in conclusion, we say forecasting construction expenditures for individual mega projects is possible, but it's challenging. We can meet the let date, I think, with good certainty. Also, it's possible to predict, when the start of construction will occur. But when it comes to predicting construction expenditures, it's much more difficult and more challenging. So many what I call known unknowns happen during that phase of a project, and also a lot of the unknown unknowns. So to tie this a little bit into lean, I throw out a question here: how can lean principles be used to more accurately predict, and model construction payout rates? So I was thinking, like, we talked about strategic, interim milestones to meet the let date. Use whole planning techniques that they use during the construction phase to meet construction activities. Do the same kind of thing during the pre-construction phase. So I thought that might be a good thing. Also, start maintaining a risk register. I put construction phase here, but it really should be design phase. Start developing a risk register much earlier, during the pre-construction phase, that you actually monitor and update your risk register and make sure it's a way to help make your your interim milestones. If you see something going awry, you've got some risk coming up, then try to mitigate them. Micro simulation techniques could be used, like I said, acting fuse is a good tool of P6. And then other ideas, and that's where I wanted to kind of open it up for any kind of discussions or questions that you might have about our research. So with that, I will say thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it being here and the opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much. Any questions?